I would do terrible, mean things to people. One time I crawled across the stage and hit my shoe on this guy's bare foot as hard as I could. And then I don't know what came over. I was in an improv moment.
At the venerable age of 78, with nothing left to prove in a world that has already crowned her, Sally Field possesses 2 Oscars, a legacy of indelible roles, and a hallowed reputation as one of Hollywood's most cherished figures. But beneath the roar of the crowd and the warmth of the spotlight, there exists a different narrative, a side of Sally the world was never meant to see. A side that holds a perfect memory of every betrayal, every calculated insult, every co-star who shattered the sacred trust of their craft. And now, armed with the clarity that only time can provide, Sally Field is finally breaking her silence, revealing the names of the 6 actors who left the deepest scars. These were not fleeting arguments or simple on-set squabbles. These were profound, soul-bruising conflicts, waged in the open and in the shadows, battles that would irrevocably alter the trajectory of her career and echo in the quiet moments, long after the final cut was called. You may believe you understand the nature of Hollywood, but this list is about to rewrite the legend. We begin with the one they called the Heartbreaker, Burt Reynolds. Theirs was a love story written in tabloid headlines. Sally Field and Burt Reynolds, the definitive power couple of the late 1970s. On the silver screen, their energy was lightning in a bottle, charismatic, untamed, and utterly alive. Their undeniable magnetism is what turned Smokey and the Bandit into a cultural touchstone, because the fiction on screen felt so powerfully, intoxicatingly real. But behind the velvet curtain of fame, the reality of their life together was a far more chilling picture. Sally would later describe Burt as a man possessed by a need for control, a man who demanded dominance and systematically diminished anyone who dared to share his spotlight, especially her. He chipped away at her with a relentless stream of condescension, questioning her appearance, her mind, and the very talent that had brought them together, all through remarks that were as subtle as they were devastating. For the cameras, he would offer a carefully crafted, backhanded compliment, only to retreat into a cold, punishing silence or a volley of passive-aggressive jabs once they were home. In her memoir, In Pieces, Sally would finally strip away the gilded veneer of Hollywood, revealing the far more complicated truth that lay beneath. She chronicled a life where her voice was stifled, where he would cut her off mid-sentence, seizing control of her thoughts and her choices, both in their careers and in their private lives. He wanted her by his side, but as a beautiful, silent ornament. She felt less like a partner and more like a prized possession, a trophy to be displayed, not a person to be known and cherished. Worse still, he became a master at manipulating her very emotions. One moment, he was the charming, affectionate man the world adored. The next, he would retract all love, using its absence as a weapon. Over time, her very sense of self began to fracture and erode. Even at the absolute pinnacle of her stardom, she confessed to feeling completely invisible when she stood next to him. "I never felt truly seen," she admitted. "I was there, but not me. Not the full me." Despite the years they shared, the life they built, Sally would later confess that she never truly knew who the real Burt Reynolds was. The man the public loved was a phantom. He was not the man who walked through her door at night. And yet, she tried. She gave every ounce of her being to make it work. "I wanted to love him," she wrote. "I did love him, but he hurt me. He may have been the bandit on screen, but to Sally, he was a thief of a different kind, and his chapter was only the beginning of her story." The egomaniac, Tommy Lee Jones. We go to the set of the 1981 film Back Roads, where Sally Field arrived with an artist's optimism. The script was raw, unconventional, a rare opportunity to explore a character of profound and messy depth. She came ready to build something real, to collaborate, to forge a meaningful connection. But instead of a partner, she was met with an impenetrable, unnerving wall of silence. And that wall had a name: Tommy Lee Jones. From the very first day, Sally recalls an air of dismissal that was not just professional, but deeply personal. He offered barely a flicker of acknowledgement in rehearsals, no casual conversation to ease the tension, and a flat refusal to engage in the time-honored ritual of actors, building the trust and rapport so vital to a demanding production. He simply appeared on set and occupied his space. He delivered his lines with a cold precision and then departed, leaving behind no warmth, no camaraderie, only a profound and isolating ice for his leading lady. A woman who had forged her name in the fires of emotional honesty and raw, open-hearted performances. Jones's conduct, by contrast, was a chilling enigma. She wasn't playing a scene opposite a detached character. She was sharing the frame with a detached man. In the unwritten code of Hollywood, co-stars have a sacred pact to elevate one another. But Jones made her feel like an anchor dragging him down. In the quiet moments, Sally would later recall, she would extend an olive branch, trying to bridge the divide. Between takes, she'd probe the depths of their characters, even offer a light-hearted jest to fracture the icy tension. But every attempt was met with a wall of impenetrable silence. At times, his gaze would pass right through her, as if she were a ghost on her own set. He treated her, she said, as if she simply did not belong there. Not with him, as if she were an amateur, unworthy of sharing his air. When Time's Backroads Times finally flickered onto the silver screen, critics were merciless, pointing to a void where the chemistry should have been. What the public, sitting in the dark, could never know was that the flaw wasn't in the ink of the script, it was in the profound, emotional frost that settled between every take. Sally's own words haunt the memory of that film. We were supposed to play two broken people learning to love, but I was playing alone. She maintained a veneer of professionalism, a trooper to the very end, but later confessed the experience had hollowed her out. The set wasn't merely cold, it was a solitary confinement. For an artist like Sally, who built her craft on the bedrock of human connection, this glacial distance felt like nothing short of artistic sabotage. After Time's Backroads *, their paths never crossed again professionally, and when interviewers would probe that old wound in the years that followed, she never offered a single scathing word. Yet a delicate frost would creep into her voice, a chill that spoke volumes. She had learned how cold a soundstage could become, but not all her battles would be fought in silence. Her next trial by fire would come opposite the notorious scene stealer, Robert Blake, during the filming of Time's Say Goodbye, Maggie Cole *. It was there that Sally Field would come face to face with one of the most dangerously unpredictable forces of her entire career, Robert Blake. A man legendary for his blistering method and his hair-trigger temperament, Blake didn't simply bring unpredictability to his role. He unleashed it like a contagion into every shadow of the set. From the very first slate, Sally found herself dancing on shifting sand. Lines would vanish and reappear, rewritten on a whim. He'd veer wildly off script in the middle of a scene, torching meticulously crafted takes with a single impulse. What he may have considered the spark of creative genius, Sally recognized as the destructive fire of pure, unadulterated chaos. She would later contend that he was systematically undermining her, a campaign waged not only when the cameras were rolling, but in the hushed moments between. But the poison didn't stop with her. Whispers from the crew painted a darker picture, of sudden volcanic outbursts, of verbal assaults, of a psychological landscape that shifted without warning. It was an atmosphere of pure hostility. One moment, he was a coiled spring of focus. The next, he was erupting at a gaffer over the angle of a light. Or he was vanishing from the set entirely, consumed by some trivial grievance. And Sally, already shouldering the weight of a complex character, found herself thrust into the role of diplomat, a desperate peacekeeper trying to hold the fragile production together. It was a war she could not win. That raw, corrosive tension began to bleed through the celluloid itself. The fractures in the foundation deepened into chasms, and soon the entire project crumbled to dust. The film was buried, never to see the light of a single television screen, a ghost of a movie, a casualty of a dysfunction that had metastasized beyond control. For any other actor, it might have been a footnote, a professional disappointment. But for Sally Field, the wound went far deeper than that. She would later use a word that rarely escapes an actor's lips when describing a job. Not difficult, but traumatic. There are actors who act, she once reflected, and then there are actors who can only feel big by making everyone else around them feel small. She left no doubt which category Blake belonged to. The statement wasn't merely an observation, it was a scar, bearing the immense weight of a woman who had been forced to endure. Far more than just a clash of artistic temperaments. She walked away from the wreckage of time, say goodbye, Maggie Cole times with a single, unbreakable vow. She had drawn a line in the sand. Chaos, disguised as genius, would never be tolerated again. But not all conflicts ignited under the hot glare of studio lights. Some were born in the gilded halls of award season. The rival, Shirley MacLaine. To the world, they were the dream duo of steel magnolias, two titans of the silver screen. They shared the frame in a story of profound love, loss, and unbreakable resilience. But behind the artifice of the camera, the dynamic between Sally Field and Shirley MacLaine was a far darker story. It was a relationship that was anything but heartwarming. From the very first take, a quiet tension began to simmer just beneath the surface. Sally approached the film with a deep, emotional reverence, connecting to the soul of her character, Malin, a mother consumed by grief. She was searching for truth, for vulnerability, for nuance. But Shirley, she treated the set like a battlefield. Whispers from the crew painted a picture of an actress who saw every scene as a contest of power. She would hold court, constantly invoking her Oscar-winning past, dismissing direction and interrupting takes, to insert herself into moments that were never hers to claim. On set, Sally fought to maintain a mask of professional grace. She offered a smile through clenched teeth, hit her marks with precision, and held her focus like a shield. But in the silence, she was utterly exhausted. One pivotal, emotional scene required a grueling 17 takes, not because Sally couldn't find the truth in it, but because Shirley refused to honor it. She repeatedly injected sarcastic quips, turning raw, authentic grief into a kind of performance art, as if her primary motivation was to systematically dismantle Sally's emotional core. It was almost as if it were written into her personal script. Years later, Sally would only touch upon the conflict in hushed tones during interviews, stating that Shirley brought a cloud of chaos wherever she went. The words weren't spoken with bitterness, but with the cold, hard weight of clarity. It was more than a conflict of styles. It was a fundamental clash of egos. Shirley needed to command the room, to own every frame. Sally simply wanted to serve the story. And the emotional fallout lingered long after the final cut. While audiences wept at Malin's heartbreaking monologue, Sally knew the most profound pain had unfolded off-camera. She would never forget its sting. But the next actor she faced wouldn't just bruise her ego. He would shatter her trust. The manipulator, James Woods. Their film, Kiss Me Goodbye, was supposed to be a charming, light-hearted affair. It was conceived as a romantic comedy with a whimsical twist designed to enchant audiences and provide a welcome breath of levity. But from the very start, Sally Field sensed a disquieting undercurrent. That something was James Woods, an actor known for his brilliant, brooding intensity. He brought an energy to the set that transformed playful scenes into a kind of psychological warfare. He didn't just deliver his lines. He dissected them. He challenged the director. He rewrote dialogue on the spot with no warning. Every rehearsal became a new battleground. And Sally, an artist who thrived on collaboration and emotional honesty, found herself completely and utterly steamrolled. She would later describe Woods as intellectually intimidating, the kind of man who wielded complex words and sharp-edged phrases. Not to build a connection, but to assert his dominance. On set, he would question the integrity of the script, critique the director's choices, and even pass judgment on her performance in the middle of a scene, poisoning the air with a tension that choked all creativity. But what disturbed Sally most took place when the cameras were off. Woods, she recalled, would casually suggest that she wasn't giving enough of herself, that her heart wasn't truly in the work. He once accused her of phoning it in during a particularly demanding day of shooting, a remark that cut deeper than he could possibly know. To Sally, it felt less like a critique and more like a calculated act of sabotage. He wasn't pushing her to be better. He was attempting to make her feel smaller, to make her doubt her own instincts. And after years spent fighting to carve out her own space of respect in a male-dominated industry, it was a bitter pill to swallow. In the quiet years that followed, she would look back on that time, not as a test of her craft, but as a treacherous walk through a psychological minefield. She would confess, her voice steady with the weight of memory. It wasn't the character that broke me, it was the daily battle to defend my own value on that set. She left that production not merely weary, but forged anew, and in the silence, she made a solemn promise to herself. Her voice would never again be extinguished by any man who confused his own condescension for a mark of genius. But the story doesn't end there. One name still hangs in the air, a name that to many would seem utterly out of place. Of the unlikely antagonist, Dustin Hoffman. In the court of public opinion, Dustin Hoffman was royalty, an artist whose name was a synonym for greatness, his shelf heavy with Oscar gold, his legacy etched in reverence. But behind the curtain, for Sally Field, he was a different figure altogether. Not a guide, not a partner, but a profound and stinging disappointment. Their names never shared a movie poster, but their orbits dangerously converged once, in the hazy glow of the early 1980s, during the casting for a film now lost to time, a project that flickered and died before it ever saw the light of a studio. For Sally, this was meant to be a door to something new. Instead, it became a chamber for one of the most soul-crushing encounters of her entire professional life. The moment arrived, the chemistry read, and according to Sally, from the second he entered, Dustin Hoffman owned the space. Even before she crossed the threshold, he held court, charming the producers, firing off sharp-edged critiques of the very script they were there to read. And then, as her voice finally filled the silence, he began to cut in, again and again. Not with offers of support, not with the spirit of collaboration, but with corrections on her delivery, with pronouncements on her artistic choices, with challenges to her very understanding of the woman she was trying to portray. All of it laid bare for everyone in the room to witness. This wasn't critique, it was a public dismantling. As Sally would later recount, it was like trying out for a judge who had already written his verdict, not good enough. She felt herself shrink, becoming a chastised schoolgirl, not the two-time Emmy-winning force, who had commanded both the stage and the screen. But the wound was about to be cut deeper. Later that week, a whisper reached her through a mutual acquaintance. A whisper confirming that Hoffman had boasted about intentionally derailing her audition. The story was that he'd declared the chemistry absent because he had personally extinguished any spark. For Sally Field, this transcended professional misconduct. It was an act of calculated cruelty. The aftermath was a quiet, internal battle. It would take time to find peace. For weeks, the echo of that room haunted her. She replayed every line, every choice, wondering if the failure was hers. But with the passage of time, the fog began to lift. Clarity arrived like a slow dawn. The issue was never her performance. It was his suffocating need to dominate the space, to be seen as the most brilliant mind in the room, even if it meant silencing another artist to do so. She would later name it, unequivocally, as one of the single most mortifying moments she had ever withstood in her professional life. And it became a crucible, forging her anew. From that day forward, Sally Field held to a new, unbreakable rule. She would no longer share her art with men who confused their own arrogance for genius, and it was a promise she would keep.